Over the last few days, the Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 ARG got a huge update. This latest mystery started when Discord user Seeing Reason updated their bio to include a link, which led to users uncovering several folders with new images, audio files containing hidden spectrometer messages, and more clues that led to yet another restricted VHS tape being revealed. This one named Restricted Condemnation. Now, I'm not going to deep dive into how people found out these new details. If you want to see that process, go watch Sheep Rampage's latest video. No, I'm more interested in how this latest VHS ties into the overall story. I think this latest ARG might have given us enough clues to solve some of Poppy Playtime's biggest mysteries, including some characters and events that we have been theorizing over for years. In fact, I think this ARG might just have solved who sent that letter all the way back in Chapter 1 and what exactly happened to Stella Greyber. This latest VHS shows Preston Willard and Jessica Newman, two Playtime co-scientists, trying to survive inside the factory in the days following the Hour of Joy. Preston has now been confirmed to be PW, the owner of the Orientation Notebook, and someone who wasn't exactly thrilled by the experiments being undertaken inside Playtime Co. Jessica, however, believed in the scientific process much more strongly, something that we now know was due to her being raised inside Playtime Co., undergoing their indoctrination before returning as an adult to work in the factory. At first, Jessica claimed that Playtime Co. would send someone to clear up the mess and rescue them, likely specialists like we saw in Project Playtime. But she clearly didn't understand that the entire factory had fallen. As they slowly ran out of food and supplies, as they lost track of the days, the two tried to come up with an escape plan. After realizing that they were surrounded by loose experiments and that escape seemed unlikely, Preston finally admitted that he had a hand in releasing the toys. After arguing, loudly, Huggy found the room that they were hiding in. Preston fled the scene, leaving Jessica behind. But we know that he didn't get very far, as he was grabbed by the red experiment shortly after. Now, before we start diving down rabbit holes, yes, I do think there is a chance that PW is still alive. As I said all the way back in Chapter 1, no body, no confirmed death. Then there is the fact that his face is completely obscured in this VHS tape. There would be no reason to do that unless there was still more to his story. I actually think PW still being alive could be part of a greater mystery that the ARG is setting up, but we'll come back to that later. One of the most interesting parts of this new VHS is that we learn that PW was directly involved in releasing the toys during the Hour of Joy. Now, that isn't all that surprising. We learnt back before Chapter 3 that the prototype was instructing someone to release the giant. But what is surprising is that PW also seems to be involved with that rogue faction inside Playtime Co. that we learnt about in Project Playtime. These people were in direct contact with the player in that game, and it was strongly implied that they were working to take Playtime Co. down from within. What makes this whole situation even more confusing is that this rogue faction is in some way tied to Stella Greyber, someone PW had a direct communication with. So it seems like this rogue faction was working alongside the prototype to bring Playtime Co. down and put an end to the experiments. But this is where things get a little bit tricky. It's entirely possible that Stella was indeed working alongside the prototype, a last-ditch effort to end the experiments. After all, Stella was shown to truly care for these orphans. But it is also entirely possible that the prototype tricked Stella into working with him. We do know that he has the ability to mimic voices, and he did use that ability to trick us. If the first theory is true, then Stella working alongside the prototype lends more credibility to the theory that he is Elliot Ludwig. Ludwig was always shown to be a great man. Everything he did was to bring joy to children, even at the cost of his own marriage. This mission was shared by Stella. She was a woman who dreamt of reliving her childhood innocence. Elliot clearly trusted her deeply as he put her in charge of his playcare, an initiative that was vital to his mission. But without Elliot's leadership, the factory slowly drifted away from that mission. No longer was Playtime Co. about bringing joy to children, it instead became a place where people sought power, using children and the science Elliot had created for their own gain. It's entirely possible that 1006 and Stella plotted the Hour of Joy as a way to end the experiments, end the nightmares once and for all. But whether Stella was a willing participant to the Hour of Joy or whether she was tricked into it, the biggest question I have remains the same. What happened to her afterwards? This is where I believe this ARG answers some of our biggest questions yet. Now, this image was our very first introduction to Chapter 5's ARG. We saw a VHS that was surrounded by several objects. Now it's clear that each of these objects was a hint of what was to come. Catnap's crescent moon was in the top left, PW's orientation notebook in the top right. We have audio cassettes and files, something that we've just been given. And finally, we have a picture of Playtime Co. and a broken leg of Bron. All of these things are clearly connected. Jessica and PW are clearly important parts of this latest story, but Bron was shown in another restricted VHS featuring Jessica years ago. Why is this being brought back up again now? Well, I think I might have a compelling answer. We know that the only living Bron we have seen so far has been a small one. This particular experiment was a staff member known as Thomas Clark. He underwent the procedure because he was suffering with lung cancer, or so we have been led to believe. Now, I have already talked about this before, but that lung cancer was likely a direct result of working around so many dangerous gases. This series does have a lot of little ironies like that. But Bron's VHS made it clear that the other experiments knew that Bron was different. After attacking him, Bron was isolated for his own safety. Since then, we have never found out what happened to him. This is how I believe all of these loose threads connect. Thomas Clark wasn't just any Playtime Co-employee. He was the doctor that Experiment 1006 brought Theodore Gramble to after his accident. Of all of the staff 1006 could have chosen, he chose Thomas. Clearly, the prototype trusted him with the life of Theo. One thing we have learned about Poppy Playtime is that the prototype looks after those that are loyal to him. The last we saw of Thomas, he was confined in the labs, the prototype's home. There is a very good chance that 1006 kept Thomas Clark alive. Thomas was a pediatrician, a children's doctor. He would be a resource that would be incredibly useful in a factory full of orphans and experiments. If the prototype was willing to keep Harley Sawyer, the man who tortured him, alive, then what are the chances he wouldn't keep a man that he trusted around? But Thomas isn't the only character I think 1006 kept around. Earlier we discussed that it seemed like Stella Greyber was involved in orchestrating the Hour of Joy. I have talked many times that I believe the prototype considered the Hour of Joy a way to save the orphans. Just as Stella was aligned with Elliot's vision of bringing joy to children, she was now aligned with the prototype who wanted to bring joy to the experiments. Once again, there is a very good chance that the prototype kept Stella around. But I think Stella's fate has actually been teased to us right in front of our faces for weeks. Stella Greyber's very first VHS tape told us that she was obsessed with staying young forever. Of course, this was a foreshadow and a mirror to the science that Elliot Ludwig created, but this is also reinforced in later documents we found out about Stella too. Stella was originally opposed to the science being used on the orphans, but after some persuading, Stella comes around to the idea. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that Stella was just going along with it. Playtime Co. was a very dangerous place, and we know what happens to staff that step out of line. But I think that Stella herself started to get tempted by that promise of eternal life. During her talk with Laith Pierre, Stella subtly asks Laith when the science would be ready. You can hear her tone perk up when she asks this question.
Just, wow. Do they know when it'll be fully ready?
She then goes on to say how much of a difference she could make with this science and how she wanted to help make those changes. Knowing that Stella's dream was to be a child forever, I think she began to help, hoping that once perfected, she could undergo the same treatment. Well, what toy could Stella become? None other than Lily Lovebraids. Now, this isn't just a guess, there are actually quite a few pieces of evidence that I have for this one. Stella Greyber's name contains a hidden meaning. Greyber is a German name that means to dig. This was usually used to indicate a grave digger. That, of course, is a very subtle piece of foreshadowing for Poppy Playtime, but her first name, Stella, is the Latin word for star. What can we notice on Lily's socks? Stars. In fact, a star has been teased for months now, something that is likely going to be an important gameplay mechanic in Chapter 5. But that's not my only piece of evidence. The only voice line we have from Lily so far has her telling us how we are going to have so much fun. This is something that Stella herself has said several times throughout her recordings for the orphans.
I'm Stella, and we've got 3 super duper fun games to play. I hope you had a fun day at the game station. Head downstairs and have fun. Who gave you permission to be this smart?
Then of course we have the symbolism. The lily flower is often shown to symbolize death and rebirth. That of course is something very relevant to the Poppy Playtime series, but this character is very specifically purple. Purple lilies represent majesty or royalty. They can also be seen to symbolize leadership. Who inside this factory would represent royalty other than those original executives? Elliot, Eddie, Leif, and of course, Stella. This could all explain why Lily is kept in the labs alongside the prototype. Stella would have needed to undergo the procedure to have lived all this time since the Hour of Joy, and the prototype agreed to keep her around since she always cared for the orphans as he did. Stella got her greatest wish. After she helped orchestrate the Hour of Joy, she got to become a child again, and in return, she continued to be loyal to the prototype, loyal to that original mission to bring joy to children. In fact, I now wonder if she underwent Grace's conditioning voluntarily. She was brainwashed into believing that she herself was still a child. She might not even remember who she was or what she had done before the procedure anymore. But this whole mystery doesn't end there. The notes we have found also give us one of our biggest clues in years. These notes were written by PW in those days after the Hour of Joy. Here we learn that Poppy stumbles across Preston and Jessica. Now interestingly, Preston says Poppy finds the 3 of them, implying that they were with someone else. We don't have any evidence on who that third person could be yet or what happened to them, but I do find that incredibly interesting. Something else I find interesting is that despite Poppy agreeing not to alert the other toys, Preston doesn't trust her. You and me both, mate. But after these notes stop, obviously because of what we saw in the VHS tape, we can see that someone added a note of their own, explaining that they found something and put it back into Preston's desk. I think this is the mysterious device that we saw at the beginning of the video. I'm sure this will be an important gameplay device in Chapter 5, but the thing I am most interested in is exactly how this was written. We know Poppy was here, and so it stands to reason that Poppy could have been the one to write these notes. It could also be Lily or Stella, knowing that Lily was here too. But if this reply was added by Poppy, then that proves that Poppy was not the one to write that letter all the way back from Chapter 1. One key defining feature of that letter was the misspelling and poor grammar. Now, many have assumed that it was written by a child, but the letter did explicitly say that the staff were all alive and that we are still here. This obviously implies that it was a staff member that wrote this letter, but who could it be? Now, after years of thinking about who could have possibly written this letter, I think one person makes the most sense: Rich. Rich has been shown to be a very important character to the story. He appears in every single chapter in one way or another, yet we still don't know what happened to him. What we do know about Rich is that he worked in shipping, a blue-collar worker. Now, despite Playtime Co. being a company all about science, Rich worked for them for years without ever being involved in the scientific process. He is the one character who in his very first VHS struggles with knowing whether a biddable is a word or not.
I just wish there were less boxes. Anything less would be more biddable. Is that even a word? A biddable?
If any of the Playtime Co. staff were going to struggle with spelling and grammar, it would be the man who struggles with words. Almost every other character we know is either an executive or a scientist. They're all academics. Rich is the only real blue-collar worker that we get to know. But I think we have an amazing candidate for who Rich could be. Yes, that Red Wuggy as some people are calling him. Now, yes, I know I predicted that Dowie was Rich back before Chapter 4 released. That was, after all, a testament to how important Rich is as a character. But this new Red character could absolutely fit the bill. We can see that he fits in with Huggy and Kissy, but larger and stronger. Well, that and that he can actually use his fingers. One thing Rich was known for was his temper, something he worked on for the sake of his wife. We got to see small snippets of his temper in Chapters 1 and 2, Rich quite literally sees red.
It's just hard to be happy about it when manufacturing's on our necks about it, because we can't fight stupid ugly boxes!
Rich.
But this toy being incredibly large and strong might just aid in his continued role as the prototype's head of shipping. After all, we see that there are more cages being moved around in Chapter 5, and he looks strong enough to do it. Just like Stella, Rich was arguably one of the good ones. He didn't seem to be involved in the experiments at all, and he was one of the few people who actually stood up for the staff under his command. Rich proved this when he mentored the kid who was being bullied by his co-workers. Once again, the prototype could have kept Rich alive after persuading him that what he was doing was right. It's what's best for the orphans.
Right, you're right. It's for the orphans.
But after seeing the civil war break out in the factory and once again trying to do what is right, Rich wrote the letter and sent it to us with the VHS tape. Rich might be a big old brute, but he is a big softy deep down. Kind of like the Gruffalo. Stuart did say Rich was a good man under all that gruff. But if Rich is indeed the person who struggles to spell, then this makes the game make so much more sense. All the way back since Chapter 1, we have been given little snippets of lore through VHS tapes. Now, I've said previously that it seems a little odd that these are just lying around in the open for us to find. But if you remember all the way back to Chapter 1, Stella Greyber's VHS tape was misspelt too. It was a slightly different spelling of her name, but now that we think that Rich is the one that is struggling to spell, this could mean that Rich has been the one leaving these VHS tapes around for us to find. Rich has been going behind the prototype's back, giving us little snippets of lore, trying to help us figure out this puzzle. Once again, he's the one trying to save the orphans. And talking about him being a big softy, this is exactly why I believe Mob are hinting that PW did not die at the end of this VHS tape. Being captured by Big Red, aka Rich, PW was likely taken to the prototype. If 1006 does truly believe that the Hour of Joy was a necessary evil like I've been theorizing for a long time, then Preston, one of the people who helped him orchestrate the Hour of Joy, might have been spared. Although I am willing to bet that the prototype had a role for him to play just like everyone else. After all, Preston knew exactly how to turn people into toys. We know that the prototype has continued the experiments all these years later. We see that the wrong side Outimals appear to be his way of punishing those that break the rules, but for Stella to be alive, she would have needed to go through this process herself. Now, if you have watched all the way to this point, I have one more crackpot theory for you. I have been talking about how the prototype looks after those who are loyal to him. I also talked about how PW was working with that rogue faction led by Stella that may or may not be working with or being tricked by the prototype. Well, one tiny detail in this new VHS might be a sneaky little clue that PW was still plotting even after the Hour of Joy. In this moment, you can see PW moving his hand in a very awkward way. Now, while this is most likely just a nervous tick, he is after all about to confess his guilt in participating in the Hour of Joy, but what if this is actually a hand signal? Notice how he does it right at the camera. What if PW in this moment is signaling to that rogue faction? Maybe signaling for help. If this red creature is indeed Rich, and Rich was the one who sent the letter to the player, that could mean that Rich is still working on his own agenda. We know that this rogue faction used the computers and likely the CCTV to help keep an eye on things. If this was PW signaling for help, this creature could be the one who answered his call. That would explain why we never saw PW's face and why we don't hear him scream at the end of that VHS. Whatever the case, these experiments that are still alive in the labs should, in theory, all be loyal to the prototype. But knowing this story, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them still have their own agendas. Now, of course, it's entirely possible that these experiments are all orphans like most other experiments, but this theory would explain why that first letter stated that the staff were all still there. All the way back in Chapter 1, we heard the scientist explain that he wasn't worried for his own safety. One breakthrough and he would be back. Perhaps this is the same breakthrough that the prototype is struggling with now. But either way, I definitely think we're going to learn what happened to these staff and who sent that damn letter. So what do you think? I'm very excited for Chapter 5 and I hope you are as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.